Okay, I'm assuming that's going. I have no idea. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about carbon dioxide is the culprit. We're going to talk about the ocean helps us because it takes 90% of the heat that carbon dioxide is trapping. We're going to talk about Florida's geology then and now. We're going to go back 120,000 years. We're going to talk about Florida's probable business as usual future. It's very gloomy, very gloomy, and it's part of what got me to be a climate migrant here. We're going to talk about why Florida, and South Florida in particular, has a triple whammy. Global sea rise is one thing. South Florida's sea rise is a whole nother thing, and I'll talk about why that is. It has to do with Greenland and the West Antarctic ice sheet. And we're going to talk about what's South Florida doing and what can we do. So, it's kind of a lot to cover. I want to give a tip of the hat to a professor I had at University of Miami, because I was also in science classes at University of Miami. This is Harold Wanless. I did attach for Samantha a long lecture, a 45-minute lecture he gave to my adult learners. And he will go into depth about sea level rise and heat. And I also have two 10-minute videos that I will send to you later that are more digestible when you're busy. Tip of the hat to him. This may be something you already know, or maybe you don't. Carbon dioxide is the culprit for our heat. You notice how I've got this blue ribbon on my slides? That blue ribbon is our atmosphere. It's 6 miles of almost breathable air and 4 more miles till you get into cold outer space. And that blue ribbon is the only thing between us and freezing to death. We'd be negative 20 degrees centigrade if we didn't have that blue ribbon around the planet. And that blue ribbon has been created over the 4.6 billion years that Earth has been around. And it has a teeny tiny portion of carbon dioxide in it. Most of it is nitrogen, about 70%, 20% roughly is oxygen, it's miscellaneous water vapor and other gases. Carbon dioxide is 0.04% of our ribbon up there. And that 0.04% of carbon dioxide in that ribbon is what keeps us warm, because carbon dioxide molecules eat heat and keep us warm. So what you're looking at with this chart is intervals of about 100,000 years. And people say, oh, there's no climate change. It's all, sun cycles. Well, yeah, that's true. There are 3 pieces around the sun that have to do with climate change. And the 100,000 years is we're elliptical around the sun. So you can see that it's hot up here. We have a lot of carbon dioxide, and that's when it's hot. And when it's cold, we have ice ages. And you'll notice that you get hot flood, hot flood, hot flood, hot flood, hot, and now it's getting hotter. And I'm going to show you a temperature graph in a minute, but just for grins and giggles, something you should know to take away, kind of interesting to tell your friends and family, is the parts per million. If you had a box of air and it had 1 million parts in it, a teeny tiny piece of it would be carbon dioxide. You'll notice at no time in prehistory, going back 800,000 years, so that's like almost 1 million years ago, we never crossed the 300 parts per million of carbon dioxide. You see where that is? By 1958, we were over that. By 2010, we were pushing 400. Take a wild ass guess. We call it a WAG in climate science. What's your WAG about what our parts per million is now, July 2022. Throw it out, yell it out. Oh, wow. At 500, the Earth is over. Thank you, Alex. It's not that bad. It's 421 parts in July and climbing. Yeah, we are on the wrong track. And you heard this, I'm sure, from Dr. Mulkey. We absolutely have got to stop burning coal, oil, and gas. But at least you should know that we're climbing. This chart I like because it shows the red is the temperature and the blue is the carbon dioxide. So you have to switch. Your mind was looking at red before, but they kind of move in lockstep. So I'm going to point to something here. and ask you if you see something odd. You see how for the last 800 years, we've got carbon dioxide and temperature kind of moving in lockstep. And here we've got carbon dioxide at our 421. Do you notice something? Does the chart look odd to you in some kind of way? Anybody? Yeah, thank you. Andrew, yeah, I knew it was an A. I was getting there. Thanks, Andrew. The heat has not boiled us alive yet. We're on our way to boiling alive, but the heat hasn't. So it's kind of like, what's going on? What happened? But before we look at what happened, let's take a look at where it's coming from. I don't think this is any surprise to you. Forest burning releases carbon dioxide from the burning trees. It also releases carbon dioxide from all of them, the biosphere that's underneath the trees when they till the soil. So we get forest burning, we get crop burning. When we put fertilizer, we also release greenhouse gases. Transportation is about 30% of greenhouse gases. Agriculture is about 30 to 34%, depending who you're asking and what you're measuring. We're burning coal. Coal is the absolute worst. Permafrost is thawing because the Arctic is warming faster than the rest of the planet. And so things that have been frozen for millennia are starting to unfreeze, and bacteria are coming alive, and then they're eating what they eat, and then they release carbon dioxide, so they're releasing more heat. So there's a lot going on that is air transport. There's a lot going on that is producing a lot of carbon dioxide, and it's making that blanket, that ribbon blanket around the Earth, it's making it a lot thicker. The largest source of global warming is the burning of fossil fuels. And I like to point out that I was born right about here. I was born in 1949. So you can blame it all on my generation. We have been burning fossil fuels at an alarming profligate rate. It has given us a magnificent lifestyle, especially in the rich countries. But the effect of the pollution heating our planet is having a disparate, horrible effect on people who had nothing to do with this. And so there's, in my humble opinion, a moral imperative that we either help repair what we've created and we stop creating it. So that's where we are from 2019. I'm going to show you a graphic that looks at the heating over time. So I'll point you to this corner. This is a Dr. Mulkey slide. And you can see the Earth breathing. As it turns yellow, it's summer. As it turns blue, it's winter. So the Earth is actually alive. It's breathing. And now we're in the 40s. And now we're in my elementary school years. And you can see the impact of the excess pollution from fossil fuel burning on the planet. This is 2017. The hottest years on record are now 2020 and 2022. So even hotter than what you see here. There's something here to notice, and it might strike you as odd. And again, I don't know what Dr. Mulkey covered when he was here before, but does something strike you about this globe in its current situation? Yeah, you've got a thought, I can see it. Yeah, we've got a cold blob right there. Yeah. And how about all the heat up here? The Arctic is now warming. It used to be 2 times faster than the rest of the planet. This class I'm taking now, we're now at 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. So the Arctic is superheated, as is Antarctic. And we're going to look in a minute about the impact of that. Did he cover it all? Why that's heating faster? It's called Arctic amplification. It's another good word for the next party you go to. It's like, hey, you want to hear about Arctic amplification? I can tell you why it's hotter. Well, I like this stuff. You know, I like telling people this stuff because they don't know it. And the reason that it is, and we're going to look at what's happening there, as ice melts, more dark water is exposed, and dark water absorbs more of the sun's heat. And as the dark water absorbs more of the sun's heat, it melts more of the ice. And you have what's called a positive feedback loop, and it just spirals. Positive is a very bad word for it. But that's why the Arctic and Antarctic are warming faster than the rest of the planet. So where is all the heat going? I promised you we would look at that. Well, the land, this pink spot, this land is taking some of the heat. So like Gainesville is getting, literally, since I've been here 3 years, it's hotter now than it was 3 years ago. And everything projects to business as usual. We're going to get hotter and hotter. Florida is on track. If we don't make changes that we have to make, Florida is on track to have more than 50 days more than we have now, a year of nights that never go below 75 degrees. A lot of plants need to have a little bit of chilling to do what they do. And if it stays too hot, they don't do what they do. So it's a problem, but that's the land. The ocean is taking up the rest of that heat, about 90% of the heat. So let's just see what happens when the ocean takes up heat. A couple of things going on. My mom used to put a pot of water on the stove, and I would watch it because I like watching the bubbles come up. And she would say a watched pot doesn't boil. But I would notice that the water level would come up as it got hotter. And so that's part of what's happening. Until about 1930, the oceans were getting warmer because we've been heating things since 1750 when we started burning coal. The ocean just expands. And so when the water expands, when the molecules are moving around more, the water gets larger. And so it just expands. But what we're noticing now is the rapidity of the rise. And we're going to take a look at why that is. Part of it is thermal expansion. So there you go. But now we're in a whole new ballgame. And here's the ballgame that we're in. This is Greenland. It's beautiful. Dr. Wanless, who took these pictures, loves Greenland. He wants everybody to go there. Even before it melts, I guess. But so it's really gorgeous. But here's what's really happening. If you look at, first of all, in 2002, scientists thought we would not lose Arctic ice until about 2050. But it's going way, way faster. By 2013, we were already at their 2050 level of ice loss. So all that ice is melting, going into the ocean. And as it clears the land absorbs more heat, and that heat melts more ice. So we have another addition to the reason that the Arctic is heating up and heating up and heating up. So if all of Greenland were to melt, it would raise current sea level by 23 feet. That's a lot of water. This shows where the ice sheet recently was. You can see how much ice has been lost just on the rocks. And then, so that's Greenland. Let's take a look at the West Antarctic ice sheet. This is something that you want to keep your eye on in the news. This is also not expected to melt for centuries, but it's on its way to melting. And when it's all gone, it will raise sea level yet another 25 feet. You don't have to worry about that right now. But right here at the orange, that glacier it's called the Pine Island Glacier. It's melting 4 times faster now than 10 years ago, and it's getting thinner. And what will happen, and this will be in the 10-minute videos that I'll send to you through Samantha. If you picture, I will bet you none of you have ever defrosted a freezer. Really, you have? Really? Then I'm going to describe what you did. You open the freezer and there's a layer of ice, and you take your blow dryer and a tea kettle of. How do you guys know about defrosting freezers?
My dad refuses to buy a new one.
Your dad refuses. There you go. Okay. So you put hot on top and hot water under, and you put a little, like a spatula under it, and you wiggle the ice. And when you lift the ice a little bit and you put hot water under it, it melts it from below, and you put the warm air on top. And you get these huge, I also thought that was pretty fun. I like doing that. Take these huge sheets of ice and put them in the sink. So I didn't have much of a childhood, as you can tell. But what's happening in West Antarctica is there's a hill and the glaciers sit on the hill and there's a chunk of ice and it goes over the hill and then there's a tongue of ice in the water. As that tongue of ice gets the hot water under it and warm water, warm air on top of it, the tongue is getting thinner and it's lifting off the hill. His video does a good job of it with slides. You have to follow my hands. And what will happen is that as that tongue starts slicing itself off and falling off, the hill that's holding the glacier on land, the glacier is going to start coming towards the water and it will have nothing to stop it. So there will be an accelerating melt of the West Antarctic ice sheet, unless we can cool the planet down a little bit. So it's just like the freezer. So there's something else going on up in Greenland, and these are called moulins. It's like the ground here is karst limestone sponges with holes in it. Okay, so that's not a new concept. The moulins are rivers that go down. They create little chasms, and then they add water to the bottom of those ice sheets. And then that lifts it off, and then those ice sheets break off more easily. So there's a lot of forces adding water there. This is what happens on top. You see how it's sooty? We have snowfall every year, which is theoretically clean, but there's some years when there's volcanic ash, or we were burning coal, or there was a forest fire or something. So when you melt off the top layer of the ice and the snow on the glacier and all the black soot is exposed, it warms the top faster. So you have a lot of accelerating activity going on the melt that they didn't know. So very much more rapid than they thought. So that just makes things go faster. Okay. I'm going to take a minute and do this next animation. Let me stop it for a second. Here's Florida. This is, I love this word, thermohaline. Temperature and salinity. That's all it means. So this shows the bright white is the Gulf Stream current. And what happens is two things are going on. The Earth is spinning, and so water is getting pushed over to the east. From South Florida, it goes over to the Bahamas, and the Bahamas sea level is actually 3 feet higher, a whole meter higher than sea level of Miami Beach, because the Coriolis effect is pushing the water that way as the Earth spins. The Gulf Stream is caused by warm air from the equator. Let's see, where's Ecuador? Somewhere in here. Warm air from the equator gets pulled into the cold air at the poles, and that pulls the surface water of the Gulf Stream. And this is really cool because if you lived in South Florida and you went fishing, you weren't that far from, the deep blue, and you could go, get seasick if you want. So the bright white line is the Gulf Stream heading north. And up here is Greenland, and this is what they call the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current. Just call it Gulf Stream. So that's what you're seeing here. Now, as we spin the globe, the lighter white is the cold water coming upwelling, because what happens as the Gulf Stream goes north, it gets a little saltier. And as the water is saltier, it sinks. And the saltier water sinks and moves the cold water at the bottom up. And this keeps nutrition flowing around the whole darn globe. But the fact that it is also melting has a lot to do with why South Florida is having a little bit more challenge than the rest of the world. So we have here melting ice from the North and South poles. We have the Gulf Stream slowing down because the overturning is not as strong as it was. So those are two whammies that cause more water to come down to South Florida. And I'm not going to let it run the whole 6 minutes, but you got the idea. Way back in 2013, which is kind of unbelievable, a glaciologist reported that, 20 meters of sea rise would bury most of Florida. Now, here we are in Alachua County or Jacksonville. You're going down to, who's in Jacksonville? Somebody was in Jacksonville. Yeah. Strawberry, but I lost it. Sorry. Okay. So you kind of want to be aware of what is coming probably faster than anticipated. So now let's take a little trip through time. 120,000 years ago, we were in an ice age. Excuse me, that is not right. 18,000 years ago, we were in an ice age. 120,000 years ago, we were in a warm stage, and the water was covering most of Florida, and this is what Florida looked like. But it really was this wide. And then an ice age came, and 18,000 years ago, the water got sucked into the poles, Greenland and Antarctica, and the water level fell 120 meters. That's like 360 feet. So Florida was really very large, very, very wide. And you can dive and see coral reefs that were alive and then got flooded suddenly, and then more coral reefs and they got flooded suddenly. So as you come in 100 miles, you can actually see geologic evidence of pulses of meltwater that brought us to here. So the sea level rise happened because 18,000 years ago, we stopped being in an ice age. We entered the period called the Holocene, which was very unusual. From that chart that we saw in the beginning, there were no level periods of even temperature. Now, of course, we were looking at 100,000 years spans, but the Holocene was 10,000 years of very stable Goldilocks temperature. And that's when civilization was able to occur. Humans were able to come out of caves. The Neanderthals vanished about 42,000 years ago, and people were able to do cultivation and do settlements and create civilizations. So that was the Holocene. Now, we've kind of blown it because we're now in what's called the Anthropocene. So that's what we were when I was growing up, and it's going to change. This is a satellite image of South Florida. If you're familiar, there's a nuclear power plant stuck in the middle of Biscayne Bay. Yeah, see some heads shaking. That's called Turkey Point. University of Miami is up in here somewhere. This is the Everglades, the river of grass that you can see there. And this is a series of what it could look like in like 40 years. 40 years from now, business as usual, we don't do anything. We're going to have possibly 5 to 8 feet of sea level rise around the globe. Florida will have it worse. Why? Because as the Gulf Stream slows, the water sloshing over to the Bahamas is going to come sloshing back. The water's there. It's just not on us. That's number one. Number two, as the North and South poles melt, more water is going to come down the coast of Florida. So you actually have to add almost, Dr. Wanless said, add between 20 and 50% to the 5.8 feet of global sea level rise, which is kind of scary. And it could affect all the way north to North Carolina, to South Carolina and even New York or Boston. So it just, when you're thinking about where you're going to live, where you're going to buy a house, where you're going to go to, I don't know how much graduate school, it's not going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years. But if you're thinking long-term, you really want to think about not being in an area that almost cannot adapt to this kind of sea level rise. You can for a little while, like the Keys. You can build houses on stilts. And in fact, Miami may end up being like that. Dr. Wanless's team did these LIDAR maps. It's light imaging something. I can never remember what LIDAR stands for. This is today, Turkey Point. And there's, a barrier island. Here's Miami Beach, barrier island. Here's Miami International Airport. Nobody from Broward, so let's not dwell too much on Broward. Here we go, 2030. That's only like 10 years from now, not even. So you can see that Turkey Point is now kind of stuck on a little island all by itself. I'm not a specialist in nuclear power plants, But you could have a storm surge that would bury it. And I don't know, are we protected from a Fukushima kind of disaster? Kind of scary. There's the airport. And if we go a little further and we go to 2 feet of sea level rise, it's a little bit worse. And then we can go to 3 feet. And we want to go all the way to 10 feet, which is not out of the question by end of century. Basically, you've got the Atlantic coastal ridge, so your grandma's okay. But Publix is underwater, her hospital's underwater, there's no Uber driver, everything's going to be gondolas, so you really, the idea of adaptation is kind of really interesting there. So just to recap, what have we got? A triple whammy for South Florida. And why should you care? Because they're going to move, and they're going to move big time when it happens again. And one of the things that, did I send you the Sanibel story? I did not. I need to do that. A few years ago, there's a really awesome group called the Marjories, and they're journalists, and they write essays about Florida. They're named after Marjorie Carr, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, Marjorie Carr. Shoot. Okay. Sorry. I can't remember your names. I can't remember their names. An essayist about 4 years ago wrote an essay, Goodbye Sanibel, way before Hurricane Ian. She saw the writing on the wall and she wrote an essay, and it was like prescient. So I reread it and it's like, oh my God, it made me cry. Just think about it. I mean, I am depressing you a little bit. I know that. But hang in, because there's hope. There's hope, and we can do it, and we can do it together. And you're in a group that will do it together. We can be sustainable, and we can stop it. And we just have to elect the right people. And we have to do Fridays for Future, and we have to join Sunrise. We have to march. I mean, even Jane Fonda, who's 84, is marching, and she has cancer. I mean, do you know who Jane Fonda is?
She did those workout videos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm very impressed. Okay. All right. So triple whammy for Florida. Besides thermal expansion, we've got the ice melt. Okay. We've got the slowing Gulf Stream. And one thing I didn't talk about, if you picture those 2 miles of ice, they have a gravitational pull, just like the moon, not as strong. So the 2 miles of ice sheets pull the sea up against them. So that's water that's not coming south. It's getting gravitationally pulled up the ice. As the ice melts, that water has no pull. So it's coming south. So there you go. The east coast of the United States and South Florida are getting reduced gravitational pull on the sea. So the water, again, whatever global sea level rise projection you're using in your own thinking, 20 to 52% higher if you're going to live along the coast, especially Florida. So, okay, so take a breath. Yeah, it is bad. It's bad because some forces of politics and business have deluded us, diverted us, distracted us, and disillusioned us. They want us to feel depressed, like there's nothing we can do, so we don't stop them. They want us to feel disenchanted, that nobody cares, and that's just not true. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of large groups and small groups, college groups, old people groups, working to make change. And I do have a handout on that table. A friend of mine is very active with church groups, and she does God's Care for Creations, but she has a really good handout. So I'm not selling God, but her worksheet is, that piece of paper by the cookies is full of really cool things that you can buy that are completely green and sustainable. So you might be interested in supporting them. So let's dial it back, take a breath. Okay, what is government doing about it? I do not know if we can go to a link like that. Probably not. Okay, I can send you the slide deck, okay? And then you can find it yourself. Dade County has woken up. Dade County is absolutely working on adaptation, which is building houses on stilts, Mitigation, which is going green buses, going EV stations, helping people not build back in harm's way. So things are happening now in South Florida that I didn't see coming when I lived there. So that's really good. And Broward, the same thing. And Jacksonville has hired an amazing sustainability director, Anne, with a funny last name. And she's worth, if you're active at all in Jacksonville area, she's worth tracking. And Orlando has Carlos Castro, who is an amazing, also sustainability manager. So there are people now in government that need your support, your help, help them volunteer if they are elected, help them get elected. So that is changing. And there's a million groups that you can join. And I'm a member of probably 500,000 of them. So if you're looking for something else to do besides school and this club, I'd be happy to talk afterwards. How are we doing? Okay, I'm going to skip this cute little video, which is about 2040, and go to my favorite video because nope. Okay. Dr. Mulkey is Dr. Doom and Gloom. He knows that. But he gave us this movie in one of my classes. It's 8 minutes, and it is great for you engineer types. There's a Sankey diagram in there. You will love it. And it's how we can do it. We just have to do it. So please meet Saul Griffiths. Can you hear?
It's to understand that it helps to get a picture of where America's energy comes from and where it goes. This is software. He's a physicist and an engineer, but this is how Dave describes him. Probably the person who knows more about energy that is used in the United States than any other human being. A few years ago, Saul decided to make a model of America's energy use. He ended up reading basically every available piece of data from the Energy Information Administration, Transportation, National Highway Transit Authority, Census Bureau, Statistics, and NOAA. So we pull all of those together to build a very comprehensive picture of the U.S. energy economy. That picture of the U.S. energy economy, it looks like this.
Here's what you get the whole thing at once. It looks like a big pile of spaghetti. It's hard to make sense of, but it just traces energy, every unit of energy. How does it enter the economy? How is it used throughout the economy?
And it's easy to understand in 3 sections. These columns here on the left are the sources of all the energy used in the US, like natural gas, coal, solar, wind, nuclear, and wood. This column in the middle is what those energy sources get converted into. So a lot of it becomes electricity. Most oil becomes the fuel we use for transportation. And here you can see how much natural gas energy is being used to generate electricity versus being used directly to power things like cooking stores. And over here on the right, this is where all the energy is used, broken down into incredible detail. Like how much energy is being used to light shopping malls in the US, or how much energy is being used by vehicles driven for work.
So you start to get this incredibly detailed picture of all of the interconnections, which is really, really important when you do the next exercise. What happens if you decarbonize?
Remember that carbon emissions come from the burning of fossil fuels. This stuff. And Saul says that means that to decarbonize, you just need to follow their path. The first place that leads you is here, with electricity and energy we use to generate it. The majority of which in the US comes from 2 kinds of fossil fuel, natural gas and coal. If the US wants to decarbonize, it needs to stop getting electricity this way and to replace it with other decarbonized energy sources. That means coal power plants, gas power plants, all electricity will come from renewable sources. Wind, solar, geothermal, hydroelectric, and biomass, or nuclear energy. Decarbonizing the electricity would be a huge investment, but it would also only eliminate 20% of emissions. And that's because electricity and energy are not exactly the same thing.
That doesn't solve the vehicle's emissions, it doesn't solve your heating emissions from using that fuel or.
All these other parts of the economy draw their energy directly from fossil fuels. Like transportation, we use oil for food. It's commercial and residential buildings where we use gas and oil for heat. This says there is a kind of elegant solution to this. You decarbonize these sectors by switching your energy source from here to here. Make all of it electric. Almost all the technology we need to do it.
Heat pumps, batteries, electric vehicles, wind turbines, nuclear power plants, we know that can work. We know we can do electric cars. We know we can do electric heat for nearly everything.
It's all they need just about machines, right? We got a bunch of machines that use fossil fuel energy. We need to replace them with machines that use clean electricity. And so it really just comes down to a matter of industrial capacity. How fast can you build machines?
There are some things we have to decarbonize. If alternative technologies, and things like steel and concrete are really hard to manufacture without fossil fuels. But if we decarbonize as much as possible with the technology that we have now, it would end most of the US's carbon emissions. This chart shows the country's carbon emissions broken down by economic sector. If electricity, residential, commercial, and transportation were mostly decarbonized, we would solve a lot of the problem. This would be a huge undertaking. And it needs to happen fast. Saul's research modeled different scenarios for the transition from fossil fuel-based machines to electric ones, from a market-driven transition to carbon taxes, to a much more direct and heavy-handed approach that would replace our machines with their electric counterparts very quickly. And he found that because we delayed action for so long, none of these slower approaches will be enough.
And he went back to 2000 and started to put like a modest carbon tax in place. And it would just ease us down over the course of 30 years or whatever. Oh, emissions kept rising, rising, rising. So now to get where we need to go, they gotta fall off a cliff, and that means zero delay. We're just talking about a level of industrial mobilization that none of us alive have seen. It would look like what FDR did to prepare the US for war. Literally, every single solitary fossil fuel machine that goes out of service is replaced by a clean energy alternative. Every furnace, car, factory, name it.
Nearly everyone is buying electric vehicle, nearly everyone is buying rooftop solar, nearly every new power plant that comes online is industrial scale solar or industrial wind. We need that level of effort to do a lot better than 2 degrees.
All of recorded human history has happened within an era of relative climate stability, an era that's about to end. But we still have control over what comes next. And the global effort that will require hinges in part on what the US decides to do. America can decarbonize. We have the technology to do it. We have the resources. The only question is whether we want to do it.
I have a 6-year-old and 11-year-old, and I have to believe that's going to happen. Otherwise, I have to try to make that happen as long as possible, because it's their future we're stealing by not doing it.
And there you go. Fabulous. Fabulous. We can do it. We have the technology. We just have to have the will. And you're part of that. So I'd like to just close by seeing if 3 or 4 of you can pull from this last hour a couple of things or 1 or 2 things that you might tell somebody about how you just invested this time. I'm not going to call on you, but maybe you think a minute. What did this program give you that you're going to take away and talk about? Because talking about it is actually better than buying an electric vehicle, because people don't talk about it. Yeah. You can't have a wrong answer.
There's positive feedback. climate change and how the ice melting causes more heat to be absorbed by the oceans, which just progressively makes the situation worse. So preventatively taking action would help to slow that down.
That's fabulous. And that's a very good, you could totally tell somebody who's not a scientist that. Thank you. One or two others. Yeah,
The fact that we started in 2000, we were have to like. Have emergency measures.
yeah, I know. Dr. Wanless made a cute chart of presidents, even the ones that said the right things, and emissions only went up. Every Democrat, Republican, Obama, Carter, Johnson, everybody's emissions went up, and they're still going up. Yeah. So if we had started sooner, which just means we have to do it now. Okay, one more takeaway. It's doable. Yeah, thank you. It's completely doable. And yeah. Right, it's not up in the sky that you have to fly there. It's not in the ocean. You have to take a submarine. It's doable. And we can do it with, just the last thing I'll say about that is bear in mind, vote, obviously. Use your wallet. Look where your food and your things you buy are coming from. I quit buying bananas, which is my favorite fruit, because they come in by boat and by airplane. And that's a big carbon footprint for a piece of fruit. So I don't mind buying something that came trucked in from California, but I'm trying to buy local. So I'm looking at where am I spending my money, and trying to buy things that are in cardboard and not plastic, that kind of a thing. Thank you. I know you have a business meeting, so I don't know what you want to do with the